not even that many letters.
How do you say your name real quick?
Nikita.
Well, how do you say it?
All right, look at your notes, please.
What is it? Just say it quickly.
All right.
Oh, I'll take it in order again.
All right, before we get really started, I want to explain something to you, because when Lonnie said protists are unicellular, I said yes, sort of, because the way that classification, these kingdoms were developed over the years, it used to be there used to be 3 kingdoms, okay, a long time ago. You'll say things were either plants, animals, or minerals. Okay? Well, obviously minerals are non-living. Eventually minerals got put off, and then there was just everything was either plants or animals. But as people looked at things a little bit further, new groups started to be added. Okay? For example, fungi was added as a group. Okay? Then once scientists first started to really study single-celled organisms, they made a group for all the single-celled things, and that was protists. But then later on, in that big group, scientists realized, well, bacteria don't really belong here. So they shifted them off to their own group. And so what was really left in protists is just sort of a group of things that don't really fit anywhere else. The organisms that are in the protist kingdom, they're not animals, they're not plants, they're not fungi, they're not bacteria, so they just got lumped together in this group. Even though lots of their characteristics are different, even though when scientists study their DNA, they find they're not really that closely related. So the protist is kind of like, it's considered sometimes like a junk heap of classification, where if something doesn't fit in any other kingdom, it got thrown in the protist kingdom. Some scientists want to get rid of protists altogether and break it up into lots of other smaller groups, but that hasn't really been done yet. So that's why, I said in our last section, protists are unicellular, and that's true of most protists, but there are some exceptions. We kind of simplify things for our purposes in 7th grade, but there are multicellular protists, things like algae, which are multicellular but are still considered protists. So there's lots of exceptions to these, and that's okay. All right, so when we talk about protists, we're not really talking about algae, okay, because that's multicellular. We're talking about something really that should be called protozoans. These are protists that are sort of animal-like. They move around usually. They have to find things to eat, or some can make their own food. So that's what we're talking about here. So first off, for our simplified ideas, we're going to say that protists are unicellular. They are eukaryotic. All protists are eukaryotic. And there are some autotrophs and there are some heterotrophs. Like I said, really this is the catch-all group. Things that don't fit other places get put here. Protists live basically anywhere that there's water. If you were to go walk around your house to a stream or a pond or something and take a little sample of water, put it under the microscope and look at it, you're probably going to see lots of single-cell little protists swimming around in that water. Protists live all over the place.
Even in our drinking water?
Probably not much in the drinking water because that's filtered and treated, so those things don't live. What's that?
Lost water?
Could be.
Ew.
No,
Fuji water.
probably not.
Fiji.
Also,
Whatever.
there are some protists that are parasites. And we're going to learn about a specific one that lives inside of another organism.
Ew.
And protists can reproduce through a method that we've talked about a little bit before called binary fission. Does anybody remember what that meant?
Like fission means dissolve.
Fission means to split.
Like
So kind of,
like maybe like split cells.
sort of. Yeah, binary means two. Fission means to split. And so when a protist reproduces through binary fission, it just kind of splits in two. It's a form of asexual reproduction. And if you think back when we covered that, how many parents are involved? One. And what are the offspring like?
It's the same.
Yeah, they're just copies. They're identical copies of the original. Here's a diagram that shows, this is a protist we're going to talk about called an amoeba. It's a sort of very flexible, blobby sort of organism. And for them to reproduce, what they do is the nucleus inside of that amoeba basically copies itself. And so then you have a single amoeba with two nucleus in it. And then the rest of the amoeba just kind of splits in half. Okay? With one nucleus on each side. And eventually, after that happens, you're left with two amoeba, but they're identical to each other. They have the same nucleus, they have the same DNA, but it's a form of asexual reproduction.
How long does it take for them to split in half?
Probably just a few minutes.
9 months.
Not long. All right, so what we're going to do is talk first about the different types of protists, and then talk about some specific examples of them. All right, so the different groups of protists are split according to how they move. A method of locomotion, we sometimes call that. So the first group are called the amoeboids. And the amoeboids move by using something called a pseudopod. So the amoeba, like I talked about earlier, is that sort of blobby shaped organism. It has a very flexible cell membrane. It can change its shape constantly. So the way that amoeba move is they sort of ooze forward. They send forward these little projections, these little areas of their cytoplasm, and then they sort of just ooze forward. These pseudopods kind of pull them along. And so that's how they move. The one we're going to look at amoeba in class. They should be on their way here right now. No. Well, yeah, some amoeba are parasites. Not the kind we're going to look at, but some amoeba can cause dysentery.
Aren't parasites bad?
It's a digestive illness.
My dad got food poisoning over break.
Good.
My dad got food poisoning over break.
All right, another group are called the ciliates. Does anybody know what cilia are? Cilia? So cilia are these, oh, this is an amoeba. So what you can see here, these little areas here, they're sort of oozing forward, those are the pseudopods.
It looks like a dolphin.
Their shape just changes constantly, so they can look like anything.
Or it
Is it
looks
what?
like a shark with an arched back. It looks like a killer whale.
Pseudo, yeah, that P you don't pronounce. All right, so ciliates, they move using something called cilia. These are tiny little hairs. What?
Is it in the wrong?
No. So these cilia are these tiny hairs that are around the outside of the paramecium, and they kind of act like sort of oars, rowing the paramecium through the water. So they all sort of move in unison, and they paddle it through the water. There are all these tiny hairs surrounding the outside of this paramecium.
So,
Another type are called the flagellates. The flagellates move using something called a flagellum. And a flagellum is just like a tail, a whip-like tail that moves, pulling the protist through the water.
so it's kind of like a
So this one, it's sort of hard to see here, but on this end of this euglena, there's this tail here. It's got like a little part here that moves the tail around, and that pulls it through the water. So the amoeba move using these pseudopods that ooze forward. The ciliates move using these tiny little hairs called cilia to paddle it through the water. And then the flagellates move using this flagellum, which pulls it through the water, moves in this sort of corkscrew shape. There's one more group called the sporozoans. These are protists that don't really move on their own. Some of these are parasites. And the one we're going to be talking about is Plasmodium. And Plasmodium is a protist that makes millions of people sick every year and causes a disease.
Is it around here?
No. Does anybody know what disease Plasmodium causes?
The flu.
No.
Ooh, I know. Maybe pneumonia.
No, it is a disease of mainly tropical areas. What?
Malaria?
Malaria.
Malaria.
Plasmodium causes malaria. It's a parasite, and we're going to learn a lot more about it towards the end of the week.
Yeah.
We learned about that in
Bronchitis.
All right, so
What is it?
this is a
What's what?
guys. Jaden and Madison, be quiet. Stop talking. So we have here, this is a picture showing some Plasmodium protists, and they destroy red blood cells, and that's what makes people sick. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. The amoeboids. So here's an amoeba. What you see is these little sections ooze forward. Those are called the pseudopods.
Wait, are we supposed to draw this?
Yeah, you could draw that. And those pseudopods, not only do they allow the amoeba to move, but that's how it eats. Amoeba engulf their food. So if there's a tiny little food particle up here, the amoeba sends these pseudopods around it, and then they connect on the other side, and it basically engulfs the food. It's this blob-like thing. And once it engulfs the food, it will then digest it and use those nutrients. And when you look at an amoeba, it's really not a very complicated organism. There's a nucleus in there. There's the pseudopods, which ooze forward. And then after it engulfs this food, and the food is inside of it, it's inside what we call a food vacuole. This food vacuole is where it can be digested. And I have a video I'll show you after we're done with our notes that shows an amoeba eating some food. You can see how it surrounds and engulfs it.
We're going to watch that today?
Yeah. Now, most of these protists are freshwater protists. And they have this important organelle called a contractile vacuole. So, if you think back when we talked about osmosis, what is a problem with cells being in fresh water? When cells are in pure fresh water, what happens, Nikita? They can explode. Why can that happen?
Because the cell moves to the
They're in fresh water.
Oh.
Charmy?
they have a low concentration of water, and so they're in pure water, so the water is higher concentration.
Yeah, that the water goes from a higher concentration in the pond or wherever they live to a lower concentration inside of the protist. And as water goes in, they could expand, they could explode, they could burst. So they don't do that though because they have this special organelle inside of them called the contractile vacuole. Can you guess what it does?
Oh, I know.
How does it help the protist?
I know.
Jaden?
Because like it contracts the food into the vacuole because it's like it contracts.
Not so much the food.
Oh,
It
anything
does
that goes
contract,
in.
it does squeeze.
Anything that goes in.
Ted?
Like reduces the vacuole so it can't hold as much water.
Not quite. It acts as a pump, basically. It fills with water, then contracts and squeezes that water back out of the protist. Like, you know, in your house, does anyone know that you have a sump pump in the basement?
Yeah.
So when water might come in your basement and start to flood, the sump pump turns on, it pumps that water out so your basement doesn't flood. Well, this is the same sort of idea as water's coming into the protist. The contractile ankle pumps it out so it doesn't expand and explode. Michael?
What happens to your body if the cells, like, if they pop too much?
In your body?
Yeah.
Like if your blood cells rupture, yeah, you can die. It can make you sick. You can't get enough oxygen to yourself. All right, so that's what this contractile vacuole does. Okay, that was the amoeboids. Ciliates. These are the ones with the tiny little hairs. So they move using cilia, these tiny hairs. And the one we're going to be looking at is called Paramecium. And Paramecium swims through the water with these cilia, kind of twists as it swims. It looks like this. It's a sort of drawing. Yeah, it's often called slipper shaped because it does. It has sort of one end's a little bit narrower than the other. This is what it really looks like. It's not as shoe shaped here, but this is it. And what you see, all these things on the outside, those are the cilia. Those are those hairs that paddle it through the water. And the paramecium is different from the amoeba because it has a hard outer shell. So the amoeba was very flexible on the outside. The paramecium has a hard shell that keeps it in a certain shape. That shell is called the pellicle.
What's supposed to go under the pellicle?
Yeah, these are kind of they're not quite in the right spot. All of these, you'll see in a minute. So it has this hard shell. So to get food, it can't just like blob around it like the amoeba could. So instead it has this indentation here. It's called the oral groove. It's kind of like its mouth. That's how it is going to ingest any food particles. And then at the end of that sort of oral groove is a tunnel, sort of like a tube that leads into the paramecium into a food vacuole. And so when it ingests food, it goes into the oral groove, through the gullet, and into a food vacuole to be digested. It also has an organelle for the removal of waste after it consumes its food. That's called the anal pora to eliminate waste. Okay, I'll show you videos of all these things in a few minutes. And then our last group is called are the flagellates.
Is it ice?
Kind of. Oh, that's its nucleus.
No, that's the oysters.
Oh, up there is the eye spot.
It's so weird.
So the flagellates move using a flagellum, which is basically a tail. The one we're going to look at is called euglena.
Why is the tail in the front?
It's because it sort of pulls it through the water.
How could you pull yourself?
Just twist around and that pulls it through the
Oh,
water.
like a sidewinder, kind of.
What is
Like-
side?
Like a snake?
Yeah, like a sidewinder snake.
I don't know. Sort of, yeah.
It kind of swerves through the
So the
water.
euglena is kind of neat because the euglena is both an autotroph and a heterotroph. If there's light available, the euglena has chloroplasts. You can see them here, these green ovals, and it can make its own food through photosynthesis. If there isn't any light available, it can also ingest food. So it can be an autotroph or heterotroph depending on its needs. It has this flagellum, that's its whip-like tail. It has these chloroplasts, which is where photosynthesis can happen. And then it has this eye spot up here. Now, I can't see. It's sensitive to light. So basically that euglena knows which direction it should move in. in order to go towards the light so it can make its own food.
How big is it?
These are all tiny microscopic.
Yeah, so you're just gonna.
I mean, you can, you'll see when we get them in class, what you'll see when I have the containers up here, the one that has euglena is green, it looks like green water, because the color does come through, but you can't see the individual.
When are we gonna
I don't know, I ordered them today, they should be here probably, maybe tomorrow or maybe Wednesday.